Hey there friends, happy Mermaid. I've got a very simple mermaid inspired Stashbuster tutorial for you guys today. We're going to be painting mermaid scales in bright, fun, vibrant colors. This is a very easy Stashbuster tutorial, but you will need to be able to draw these kind of scale shapes, and I'll demonstrate them for you guys a little bit later on. The real trick comes with the masking fluid and the layers of paint and your selection of paint. So grab your paints, grab your brushes, and let's get painting on this mermaid bookmark. So today's materials include a scrap of cotton rag watercolor paper, some masking tape. I'm actually trying out a different artist masking tape today, some masking fluid. You're also going to need some bright, fun, vibrant colors, and I would recommend some colors that you know will granulate. I'm using a few different sets that I've reviewed here on the channel. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to tape our scrap of watercolor paper down to our support. I'm using a cut up political sign, those plastic coroplast lines. You can use foam core, you can use cardboard, whatever you have. So then I spritz my watercolors with some water to pre-activate them so they can soak up some of that water and they'll be ready and available when I'm ready to start painting. I also propped my watercolor board up just a little bit to let gravity help me with some of our gradients. I'm starting with hot pink and I'm going to be working my way down to purple. I'm using a quill for this, which is kind of like a larger round to simplify things. They can hold a lot of water and they can be a lot of fun to paint with. And I'm using a small ceramic plate as my mixing palette. This is just one that I got at Walmart. You absolutely don't have to be fancy if you don't want to. We just need a surface to ensure that we're actually mixing our paint fully. You can use whatever colors you want, but I thought pinks, oranges, reds, and purples would be really fun because later I'm going to be layering on some greens, some teals, and some blues, and I thought this would give us some really pretty contrast. Once it's dried fully, I'm going over it with another layer. I'm kind of switching up the order of colors, starting with an orange, going in with a hot red, then I'm going in with a really light hot pink. I'm using a mix of watercolors here. There's some Kusakabe, there's some Turner, there's some Holbein in this palette, but you can use whatever you like and whatever works for you. I know Paul Rubens has a neon palette that I have and I need to review for you guys because I am super stoked about it. That could be a really good fit for something like this. So when I mentioned earlier that I'm going to be using a few different granulating watercolors, so basically colors that specifically granulate out, that's going to give us some really pretty misty kind of effects with the colors that we've chosen. I've grabbed the Paul Rubens Shiyun palettes as well as the Supervision super granulating colors, but you can use whatever you have and whatever you like. A lot of different brands make these kind of super granulating colors. Even a good ultramarine blue will do the trick, so don't sweat having exactly what I have. I will have my materials listed for you guys down in the description below, but this is really intended to get you guys painting even if you're not confident in your drawing skills. So I'm not really stressed about you having exactly the right materials. This is about making adorable bookmarks and honing our painting techniques, because I want to show you guys that you don't have to be great at drawing to be able to do watercolor. In fact, watercolor is such a beautiful medium in and of itself that often the paints themselves just stand alone. So I've layered on a lot of color. I've done a lot of layers. In some ways, I've kind of blown everything out. This is up to you how many layers you want to use, what colors you want to use, where you want to put the colors. This is your bookmark. You do what you want with it. But when you're satisfied with your layers, you're going to need to let your bookmark dry out completely. I have found that for best results with masking fluid, it's best to start with a dry piece of paper, even if it has paint on it, and to end, to remove with a dry piece of paper. Speaking of masking fluid, I'm using Winsor & Newton's somewhat dyed, so it's got a little bit of a yellow tint to it. Okay, so for the scales, we're going to start with kind of a scallop effect starting at the top. I'm going for kind of 1 and 2 halves on either side. It's helpful to be kind of picky and careful with this, so if you need to, you can sketch it out with a light pencil first. So then we're just kind of working our way down, going from the midway point in between the scales and kind of making a scallop. So hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about. This is going to work best if you're patient with yourself and you're patient with this. I actually had an earlier version of this tutorial where I was very strapped for time. I was prepping for class and I had family over and I just couldn't focus, and I tried to rush through it and it didn't turn out well at all. So this is actually version 2. I was really tempted to keep version 1 so that you guys could see how I wasn't happy with it and what you can sometimes do with an idea that you love but isn't quite panning out. But I decided to scrap it because I could just tell you guys about it. I don't really need to like spend your time with you guys watching me struggle with something only for me to decide that I don't like it at all. But with this one, I definitely took my time. I was very careful. So I'm going for kind of a wider line with this, and I am using a synthetic watercolor brush, a cheap synthetic watercolor brush, and I have kind of washed in a lot of brush soap into it, and that's going to protect the ferrule and the bristles from our masking fluid. I've also poured my removable Winsor & Newton masking fluid with a slightly yellow tint into a dinky dip, a small cup, and this is not only going to extend the life of my masking fluid since the big bottle isn't going to be exposed to air, but it's easier to work with and it's less prone to spilling. And the holder is from someone called Oblique Love Letters. I purchased it through their Amazon shop. I'm very happy with it. I highly recommend it, and I'll have it linked for you guys down in the description. So once you finish painting your scales, you can do a little bit of a flick splatter technique. You can also fill in some of the scales if you want to. I'm doing that so that I can reserve some of that really bright color. So we're going to have 3 layers of color going on, and this is a glazing tutorial. So we're talking about wet to wet blends, we're talking about gradients, we're talking about masking, and we're talking about glazing in today's Stashbuster. So for every Stashbuster, I try to really focus on a few techniques and really letting those few techniques shine. So they're really more technique focused than technical skills or drawing focused. And hopefully that makes it accessible to people who love the watercolor medium and love how watercolor look, but aren't fully confident in their watercolor skills. So I'm going to apply my masking fluid all the way down my bookmark. I've allowed my masking fluid to dry completely, totally, and fully, and now we can start playing around with our super granulating colors. So these have got some heat here on YouTube. I am sure that some of you in the comments will be pointing that out. So this is not going to be light fast, but we're using this as a bookmark, so it's probably going to get some wear and tear anyway. I have talked about these watercolors, both types, both the Cheel and the Supervision super granulating watercolors here on the channel numerous times. So rather than focusing too much on the drama behind these super granulating colors, I'm going to focus on what they can actually do for me, which is create some beautiful granulation effects on top of our vibrant colors. So you guys can already see the areas that the masking fluid is protecting and how beautiful and how much they contrast with the colors that we're using. So I let my first layer of super granulation dry, and now I'm going back in with our masking fluid and I am masking out more scales. So like I said, we're building up 3 layers of glazing and 3 layers of color. So it's going to look more complicated than it actually is. And I'm using the same sort of brush technique where I have a synthetic brush that has some brush soap worked into the bristles to protect the ferrule. And I'm just working my way down, and I'm going to allow my masking fluid to dry completely, totally, and fully before we add our 3rd layer of color. That said, I also wanted to add a little bit of a splatter technique to kind of give the impression of, say, water spray. So I'm just gently hammering on my brush, and that's going to flick little bitty droplets of masking fluid onto our paper. So once everything's had a chance to dry totally, we're going to go back in with our super granulating colors. Now, you can switch it up. You can do darker colors. You can do different colors. It's kind of up to you and what you would like to see and what you think would work. But I think I'm gonna start going in with darker colors at the top, and that's gonna, so I'm basically just shifting my whole lineup of gradation one color down, one color darker, and that's gonna allow me to kind of build up some of those tones. So with these super granulating colors, you really notice the granulation effect the most when you've introduced a lot of water. So this is going to be more of a subtle granulation technique than a really striking apparent granulation technique. But if you're looking for tutorials that really celebrate the granulation properties of watercolor, I've got a bunch in our Stashbuster series, so hopefully you guys will check them out. So that needs to dry fully, and then I'm using a masking fluid pickup. My fingers don't work as well as some people's do for picking up masking fluid, so I find this little tool to be really helpful. You can find them down at Dollar Tree, so they're not really expensive, but they're one I use all the time. And I'm using it to just kind of help me pick up my masking fluid. And you guys can see our gorgeous scale pattern starting to really be revealed. Now, the masking fluid did pick up some colors more than I really wanted it to. It really shouldn't do that, but that does happen sometimes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to repaint some color on a couple of the scales just to adjust the vibrancy, but that's really a matter of taste. I didn't have to do that. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but if you do, you can also do that. Now I'm going to be careful because we have such clean lines regarding our scales. I'm going to be careful not to reactivate any colors accidentally. If you want it to kind of spray out or blow out at the bottom, you can use a spray bottle of water and spritz it a few times to really encourage those pigments to move. That could be a cool technique, but I recommend that what you do with watercolor, you do it with intention. If you make a mistake, make it look like you did it on purpose. Make it work for your piece. That's one of my biggest pieces of art advice as an illustrator, as a watercolor painter, and as a comic artist is whatever you do, own it and make it look like it was a choice you made on purpose. And once our bookmark is done, we can remove our masking tape, pulling it away at a 90-degree angle. And there we have another gorgeous Stashbuster DIY watercolor bookmark. This one is in honor of MerMay, so it is a mermaid scale or mermaid tail bookmark. I hope you guys had fun painting along with me. I had a blast painting along with you guys. I've really been enjoying this Stashbuster series as I've been working on different bookmarks and different techniques. It's been very relaxing and it's been really fun to try to come up with new projects that I think you guys will enjoy. So if you enjoyed this one, make sure you let me know with a big old thumbs up and tell me in the comments. And if there's any ideas that you have that you'd like to see me try as part of my Stashbuster tutorial series, let me know that as well. If you're looking for more in-depth watercolor tutorials, I have a watercolor crash course that I'm working on, and I've also got loads of more in-depth comic and illustration tutorials for you guys. Speaking of comics, if you like my art, I would love it if you checked out my comic 7-Inch Kara. You can read it for free at 7inchkara.com. So huge, enormous thanks to my amazing art nerds over on Patreon. Their support makes tutorials like this one possible. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and hopefully this was helpful in helping you guys make art a habit.